As I move on with the Dreamland podcast, one thing I'm trying to do is put out stories of people who are living professionally or personally with the drug issues on the street of this country, primarily the synthetics, fentanyl and methamphetamine, though I think the hyperpotent pot idea is going to become an important part of what I try to do as well. I spoke recently in Napa County, California, which is, as it sounds, the center of Napa Valley wineries. I had a chance to meet the sheriff, Sheriff Oscar Ortiz, who has a long career, starting his career in 1991 in the jail of Napa County and became a sheriff's deputy on patrol, then narcotics investigator, and more recently, the sheriff. He's just the kind of guy who I think can provide real world lived experience through his career of how meth has become this extraordinarily damaging drug in America today. Dwarfed in the headlines by fentanyl, of course, but nevertheless creating problems of mental illness and devastating counties. So here now is my conversation with Napa County Sheriff Oscar Ortiz on the Dreamland Podcast. Sheriff Oscar Ortiz, thanks so much for taking some time. Can you just give me a quick idea? When did you start and when did you begin really investigating drug cases?
Actually started working in the jail when I was 20 years old, so 1991, and then I went to patrol, became a street cop in 1996. So I saw, I share that to you because when I was in the jail, I saw the addicts because they would come in, they would get arrested. It's been weeks, days, weeks, months in the county jail. I saw the withdrawals, the heroin addicts, meth addicts, and then when I hit the streets and made arrests, I saw mostly meth, some heroin, but mostly meth. And I remember it was, we called it biker meth, right? It was that chalky, off color, a little bit kind of almost a yellow tinge to it, powder chunks. Later, when I was a sergeant, 2008, 10 years later, maybe, we never saw that kind of meth anymore. It was all the crystal. I remember one of my last undercover cases negotiating a pound of methamphetamine, crystal methamphetamine, for talking the dealer down to about $12,000 for the pound. And then when I went back to patrol and went back to started promoting in our organization, now as the sheriff, I talked to my narcotics detectives, and they're talking about pounds of meth negotiations in their work under $2,000. It's just a whole nother market now than what it was just a few years ago. I had early in my career, because of safety issues, in the police academy, and then after the academy and the early trainings, we had a lot of training on labs, and dismantling, what to do if you come across a meth lab because of, they're so dangerous, that the toxic air, the toxic fumes, they can kill you right there, the potential for explosions and fires. I mean, all the hazards associated with meth labs. I haven't seen a lab in probably 20 years. There's no stovetop labs with producing an ounce of meth and some glassware or whatever. I mean, that was kind of you see that at a trailer or at a motel room. We don't really see that in California anymore. It's kind of mostly, it's pretty much industrial, huge labs that are producing metric tons of methamphetamine south in Mexico.
I'm wondering if you think the effect on the brain of this methamphetamine has changed from when it was weaker, stepped on, as you say, maybe 50%, 60% meth and 40% adulterant, whatever, to now where it's upwards of 95% and so on.
Methamphetamine abuse has always been, to a lot of cops, we call it the walkaway drug. You walk away from your job, from your wife, from your kids, from your life, right? You end up homeless and just living for the meth. I think it's always been that, but anecdotally, my observations is it's not really a walkaway; it's a runaway. It happens much faster now, right? It's over the course of years of methamphetamine abuse. Your marriage goes, your career goes down the tube, your marriage goes down the tube. Your housing, everything starts to fall apart. Where now, I think, because of the potency and because the price point is so low, there's no reason to step on it necessarily. So the end user is getting a much more pure product than they were 20 years ago. It's still a walkaway drug, but that walkaway is happening over the course of weeks and months, not years.
I'm wondering if you think that now affects, because of the prevalence of the supply, creating this kind of very quick transformation in a life, addiction, and so on. If you're finding people from walks of life that you never used to find get involved in this drug that now are.
But 100%, I think there's just more of it there, and you see it across all walks of life. I think there's always a threat to all walks of life, but I do see that um, expanded today for sure. Amphetamine, when somebody overdose, it's that car pursuit, robber, rapist, shooter. I mean, the psychosis, the behaviors really draw law enforcement because it can be very violent, very disruptive to society. A lots of sexual assault, a lot of child molest. Again, a lot of theft, violence, resistance. It's that
Public,
conspiracy theory.
very public violent or violent behavior acting out. The other day, someone told me there was this guy on our street, stripped to the waist, with a machete, wandering in the middle of our block, yelling and waving a machete. And to me, frankly, that just meant methamphetamine.
Correct. And it could be the intersection of mental health disorder at the same time, but
Sure.
um, but again, the methamphetamine is just exponentially making it worse, or causing it, and that's probably a conversation for a neuroscience, not for me. But what I can tell you as a cop, it doesn't help. It doesn't make it. We have less resources for mental health treatment. That's one wave that's going to crash into lower price point as methamphetamine is industrialized in clandestine labs in Mexico and smuggled into the country at, at truckload levels, right? And so you add those two things as you know, I mean, not the topic for today, but when as this country and state of California legalized cannabis, those cannabis smugglers didn't just say, okay, well, we're out of business. Let's just kind of be law abiding now. They just shifted to other drugs because they still have their routes and their distribution networks. So now you have more methamphetamine and fentanyl and heroin getting pushed up through those drug trade routes because it's less cannabis, kind of an unintended consequence, if you will. And add that to the collision. Add, criminal justice reforms that say, hey, if you're just an addict, you shouldn't go to jail, right? And so, and I've always contended, and this goes back to my early 90s experience of seeing people come into jail, stay in jail long enough to actually detox and go through withdrawals and recalibrate their brain chemistry to a level where they get on that phone and make a collect call to their mother or to their pastor or to their wife and start kind of making reconnecting with those relationships that they walked away from when they were in the groves of addiction. And then uh, as they go through the justice system, they're ready to enter into treatment. The judge might give them a second chance, say, hey, we're not going to send you to prison, we're going to send you to a drug treatment, and they're motivated to get that drug treatment. um, Fast forward to all the reforms, and if you catch an addict with a needle full of meth in a hotel room, and that's all you have, you basically give them a ticket, right? If you don't give him a ticket, you take him to jail, he's going to get right out. Well, in either of those scenarios, what is that addict going to do? You book that needle full of methamphetamine into evidence, so they don't have it. So the first thing they're going to do is go find another needle full of methamphetamine because they're not doing anything about their treatment. So that constant habitual use without the consequence of a timeout, right? Is go in jail for a timeout to get some sobriety, really deteriorates those neurological health faster, right? Those the brain chemistry that's been altered doesn't get a chance to recalibrate, so the mental illness exacerbates. So you take all those things I mentioned, um, and they all happen in the same, in the same 10-year window. Um, it's just this collision course for, and then we scratch our heads like, why do we have a mental health crisis? Why do we have a meth crisis? Well, we kind of, it was just a combination of, whether it's laws or policies, or uh, foreign policy too, right? International policies at the border. You put all that together into this soup, and we have what we're looking at.
It's so interesting because I kind of put that together myself independently, and I'm fascinated to hear you talk about it in that way. That there were all these things that kind of combined. One of which, of course, was the enormous supplies being produced out of Mexico, but there were a bunch of other things. One of the things also I have found in my interviews of recovering addicts is they so often say the best day of my life was when I got arrested because it got me off the street. I'd be dead otherwise. I've heard that way too many times now. And this was even pre-fentanyl, and certainly now it's more true than ever with fentanyl on the street. But I was fascinated to hear you talk about the importance of jail getting people away so their minds get a little bit of a break and they can begin to understand what's actually in their best interest for their own survival. Would you say that this is a common experience that you have seen in your years, both in law enforcement, both as in the jail and on the street?
Oh, absolutely. I've had it. I've been around long enough to where I can still run into people from time to time that'll recognize me because I arrested them at some point in their life, right? And they'll say, Officer Ortiz, does the sheriff, Deputy Ortiz, or however they remember me, Sergeant Ortiz, and they say, hey, they'll walk up and shake my hand, and sometimes, honestly, I don't recognize them. I don't remember it. Sometimes I do. And it's like, hey, I just wanted to thank you. You took me to jail, and I was able to change my life. I have gotten that. I think we have, I have a lot of young deputies working here at my office now that are post policy shift, right? They became cops after all these policies and laws changed. So, I would surmise they're never going to have that experience of somebody coming up and thanking them for being arrested because, the law, they didn't work law enforcement in that world. And we could talk about the failed war on drugs and all that rhetoric. But I do think there's something to that. I'll share with you, as you know, sheriffs are elected. So when I was going through my political process and gathering signatures to get on the ballot and whatnot, I did run into somebody who said, "I'll absolutely sign your petition, Sheriff." Um, and I didn't recognize him. I don't know who he is, but he said, "I really want to sign it because you saved my life." To your point, it's like, I want to sign it. You saved my life. You arrested me once. Uh, I don't remember the arrest. I don't remember the individual, but he's very passionate that he wanted to support me politically because he felt that my taking him to jail really helped him turn his life
You
around.
know, I'm wondering if you are seeing then any kind of more intense transformation of the mental health beds in your jail, given the meth that's on the street now, as opposed to as I remember you said in the 90s, you would have some, and some of those folks would have problems of mental illness due to methamphetamine. I'm just wondering if how frequently you see this and what you actually see nowadays in those beds.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's again, it's a collision course of different policies and law changes, right? There's less state resources. There's like, the Department of State Hospitals, the mental health beds has shrunk, not increased in the last 20 years. So, so there's less places for them to go. And then, eventually, I mean, the whole idea is let's not put these addicts in jail. Well, eventually, because of their behavior, because of the overdose, because of the mental health, or all of the above, they have done something of a serious enough nature where they're going to go to jail, right? They've stabbed somebody, they've raped somebody, they've killed somebody, and so they are taking up jail beds. I think the state hospitals, the mental health system has now kind of morphed into the county jails across the state, right? So I think the biggest mental health hospital system in California is no longer Department of State Hospitals, it's county jails. And
Yes.
then as policy shifted even more, after 2020 and social justice reforms and post George Floyd, where there's less incarceration even for other crimes beyond drug crimes, even some violent crimes,
Right.
um, then they're not in jail. So where are they? Well, they're in our homeless system, they're in our homeless and supportive housing and our homeless shelters. So our government run homeless shelters, our government supported supportive housing, transitional housing infrastructure has a lot of folks suffering from mental health illness now. What caused it is a debate for the neuroscientists. I would anecdotally say that meth didn't help, but now you have less mental health run by the state beds, but more patients, and those patients are landing in county jails and in homeless shelters and in homeless housing programs, where you have worker like you have nonprofit employees, with small salaries and minimal training, dealing with these what used to be a patient that was dealt with by a RN or a psych tech or a psychiatrist. That same patient is now being cared to by a nonprofit employee with minimal training and minimal salary.
I'm wondering if what you see as the effect on all this of marijuana legalization, particularly the high potency of the marijuana that's now been made legal, 30, 40% THC buds, vapes that are significantly higher than that, maybe double that, any thoughts on, do you have any thoughts on that at all?
It is a underregulated market. I mean, alcohol and tobacco is regulated at a higher level than the cannabis industry. So we really, I think, need to revisit that. I don't think we're ever going to get back to a prohibition of cannabis. I think that genie's out of the bottle. But it is an intoxicant. Don't listen to us cops, but talk to the neuroscientists, talk to the psychiatrists, talk to the brain researchers. Seems like every week a new study comes out about the negative consequences to youth mental health, to brain chemistry of young people, especially with the high potency, whether it's concentrates or cannabis. If I have a good chemistry kit, I can make 90% THC concentrated cannabis, and do it, and as long as the quantities aren't huge, totally legal, totally within my rights under current laws. So I do think that needs to be explored and visited because everybody talks about youth mental health and doing something about youth, especially after COVID. We need to do better with youth mental health. Well, that needs to be part of the conversation because we're seeing young people who have developing brains and growing brains uh, go from recreational or experimental use of cannabis and cannabis products to use that's causing health issues for them, mental health issues and societal issues.
Yeah, it seems to me that we have unleashed such high potency stuff on kids today. It's not goes beyond even meth and fentanyl and marijuana and all this stuff, but other things, gambling apps now, social media. My God, you could go on for a long time about all of that. They chart the mental illness decline of kids to when the first iPhone or smartphones were made
Correct.
public and became widespread. It's a remarkable thing. When I was writing The Least of Us, I began to realize that the Sinaloa drug cartel is really kind of at the end of this long panorama, this scene where you get all this legal stuff first, and junk foods, sugar, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, it's fascinating, fascinating stuff. Have you seen, one last question, have you seen any changes recently in the drug supply, meaning new drugs in the drug supply in Napa County at all? New synthetics, anything like that?
I mean, the obvious one that we have seen in the last 3 going on 4 years is certainly fentanyl. But it kind of ebbs and flows. But in 2000 and when I first became sheriff in summer of 2021, it was all the media. Everybody was talking about fentanyl, and I kind of hit a pause button on that conversation when it was brought up to me as a brand new sheriff going, hey, like, and it still is like, we've got a methamphetamine problem. Like, let's not take our eye off the ball. This is the root of all our evils and all our problems in our community. Let's stay focused. Let's not lose our focus over this sexy new word of fentanyl. Um, However, in that first year, we saw more fatal overdoses and more seizures. And so then I was like, wait, okay, we need to pay attention. This is a problem. Still second place, still not, not overtaking meth, but certainly a problem.
Fentanyl has been the main headline across the country, and I think with good reason. But I'm always struck, as I think you are, that the power and the supplies of methamphetamine are just creating unbelievable problems for counties all across the country. It's a remarkable story, I think, and one I'm going to continue to focus on. Anyway, Sheriff Oscar Ortiz, Napa County Sheriff, thanks so much for taking some time to talk with me. Always find it fascinating to talk with folks like you who have lived this and been on the street and so on. So much appreciated. Thank you very much.
No, thank you for reporting on this.
You've been listening to my conversation with Napa County Sheriff Oscar Ortiz on the Dreamland Podcast. I hope you liked it. If you did, please share it. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is True Tales Video, and to my Dreamland newsletter, which you can reach at samquinones.substack.com. I'll see you next time.